It started with a handshake and ended with a wedge. The once dependable alliance between Canada and the United States is beginning to show deep cracks. Not over war or borders, but over tariffs, sovereignty, and shifting global priorities. President Donald Trump's latest actions, placing tariffs on Canadian steel, aluminum, and more, sent a clear message. But Canada didn't just complain. It started changing course. Trade, defense, energy. All of it is moving away from its longtime partner and heading toward Asia. Canada used to send more than 3/4 of its exports to the U.S. But that's no longer the full story. In just 1 month in 2025, Canadian exports to countries outside the U.S. jumped by nearly 25%, the second largest spike ever recorded. At the same time, exports to the U.S. dropped more than 6%, the worst decline since the pandemic. This isn't a blip, it's a pivot. The backbone of this shift is Canada's deal with Asia-Pacific countries, through a pact called the CPTPP. Trade with China, Japan, and South Korea is rising, and not just with words, but with ships and contracts. While Washington eyes the Middle East, Ottawa is strengthening its links with Tokyo and Seoul. Canada's military is also evolving, joining naval exercises in the Indo-Pacific, expanding cyber and defense ties with regional allies, and looking to join new pacts that center around next-generation technology, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, hypersonic weapons. And while Canada broadens its horizons, the United States is planting its flag deeper into the Middle East. President Trump's recent tour included billion-dollar deals with Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE. In Riyadh, he signed the biggest U.S. arms deal in history, over $100 billion worth of defense systems, drones, and transport aircraft. U.S. companies like Google, Oracle, Boeing, and Nvidia were part of a $600 billion investment package, touching everything from AI to infrastructure. Meanwhile, Qatar ordered over 200 aircraft from Boeing, in what Trump called the biggest plane sale ever. The contrast couldn't be sharper, as Trump builds ties with Gulf kingdoms. Canada sends delegations to Tokyo and Seoul. In early June, British Columbia's premier will lead a mission to Japan, Malaysia, and South Korea, with the goal of pulling in foreign investment, boosting trade, and positioning the province as Canada's new economic engine. Why now? Because for many Canadians, the United States has become a source of instability. A national survey shows that nearly 4 in 5 people believe the old U.S.-Canada partnership is over. Even buying American goods is falling out of favor, with many saying they'd rather spend money elsewhere. Premier David Eby spelled it out. It's time to stop relying on one partner and start expanding globally. Alongside him, ministers and business leaders are targeting key growth sectors: clean energy, low-carbon tech, wood, seafood, and critical minerals. There's strong demand for halal food and forestry products, and the meetings planned with investors and universities show this is more than just diplomacy. It's economic strategy. British Columbia's trade numbers prove it. In 2024, the province exported over 54 billion Canadian dollars in goods. Nearly half of that went to Indo-Pacific countries, and more than 1/3 of Canada's total exports to Japan and South Korea came from British Columbia alone. Japan is now Canada's 4th largest trading partner, with a two-way trade topping 36 billion Canadian dollars. Canada ships over coal, propane, pork, wheat, and soybeans, and buys back cars, machinery, and electronics. The CPTPP agreement slashed tariffs and made this trade smoother. Japan is also Canada's biggest Indo-Pacific investor, with nearly 50 billion Canadian dollars placed in sectors from finance to forestry. LNG exports from British Columbia to Japan are also gearing up, offering a new route away from U.S. dependency. Defense ties between the two countries have quietly grown. In 2024, Canadian and Japanese defense officials met to plan joint activities in space, cybersecurity, and special forces. They're also working on a logistics deal to share equipment, food, and fuel during military missions. And in the skies and seas, Canadian and Japanese forces are training together in exercises with the U.S., the Philippines, and Australia. South Korea has emerged as another anchor in Canada's Indo-Pacific plan. Since 2015, the Canada-Korea Free Trade Deal has cut tariffs and opened markets. And by 2023, trade between the two reached nearly 21 billion Canadian dollars. Canada sends minerals, meat, wood pulp, and machinery, and imports vehicles and electronics. But now it's about more than trade. South Korea is offering Canada the K9 Thunder, a modern artillery system used by NATO allies. It's mobile, fast, and made for cold climates. Exactly what Canada needs to replace its aging howitzers. And the deal could include setting up maintenance and even production in Canada. bringing jobs and strengthening domestic industry. Together, Canada and Korea are diving into defense tech, including AI and quantum computing, as part of a broader security strategy in the region. Their relationship is now labeled a comprehensive strategic partnership, one of the highest forms of diplomatic alignment. Meanwhile, Malaysia is also becoming a growing partner. Bilateral trade between Canada and Malaysia rose nearly 40% since 2020. A Canadian delegation recently visited Kuala Lumpur, targeting areas like clean tech, cybersecurity, and aerospace. BlackBerry even opened a cybersecurity center in the city, showing Canada's increasing footprint in Southeast Asia. On the defense front, Canada and Malaysia have trained together to counter terrorism and chemical threats, and share intelligence under regional agreements. But behind all these numbers lies Canada's most valuable card: energy. Canada's oil exports to the U.S. reached record highs, with nearly all of its crude heading south. Most comes from Alberta, moving through pipelines like Enbridge's mainline system and the Keystone Line. But here's the twist. While the Trans Mountain expansion increased total capacity, it wasn't meant for the U.S. Instead, it opens Canada's access to Asian buyers via the Pacific. The same goes for natural gas, though volumes have dropped compared to 2 decades ago. New projects like the LNG Canada terminal, set to start shipping in 2025, could shift nearly 2 billion cubic feet per day away from U.S. markets. Future facilities at Prince Rupert and Woodfibre could multiply that even more, cutting into the U.S. share and boosting returns for Canadian producers. Canada is also a major electricity exporter, especially clean hydropower. Nearly 50 terawatt-hours were sent to the U.S. in 2023, with expansion plans aiming to lift that by 30 to 40%. Major projects in Quebec and Manitoba could push revenues to new highs by the end of the decade, and maybe even enable exports across the ocean if undersea cables become feasible. Prime Minister Mark Carney has laid out a plan to make Canada not just an energy player, but an energy superpower. And it's not about oil alone. His vision blends nuclear, hydro, renewables, and carbon capture, while still backing traditional energy like pipelines and gas, especially when it serves Canadian needs and cuts reliance on U.S. imports. Carney repealed the carbon tax, not because he's walking away from climate goals, but because he says it wasn't delivering. He wants scalable results, not slogans. And he's open to speeding up infrastructure projects, using provincial reviews where it makes sense, while still honoring Indigenous rights and environmental checks. He calls this a shift away from rhetoric, toward results. Dialogue, not partisanship. Projects, not promises. But the regulatory hurdles are real. Canada's oil and gas sectors face aggressive emission rules, with caps on total output and steep cuts required by the end of the decade. Provinces like Alberta are pushing back, worried these rules will scare off investment. Meanwhile, limited pipeline capacity still restricts access to global buyers, and delays on projects like Keystone XL have made investors wary. The gas sector is in a similar bind. Almost all of Canada's gas still flows through the U.S., locking producers into American prices and exposing them to tariff risks. LNG Canada is a start, but more projects must clear financial and political hurdles to unlock full export potential. Canada's strength lies in both its hydrocarbons and clean power. It has more than 80 gigawatts of hydro capacity, one of the world's largest. Nuclear sites like Bruce Power and Darlington keep base load power steady, while wind, solar, and batteries are expanding fast, helped by tax credits and provincial programs. The country's oil reserves, the 3rd largest in the world, continue to support jobs, tax revenue, and export earnings. But the future is clearly about balance, combining fossil fuels with innovation, and selling not just raw resources, but clean, efficient, and secure energy to the world. If Canada can fast-track its infrastructure, strengthen its trade ties beyond North America, and build consensus at home, it won't just adapt to global shifts, it'll lead them.